Good morning. My name is Sarah, and these are my colleagues Keskine and Pablo. Thank you for coming to hear about our global policy project titled Enhancing Rural Livelihoods. Today we will be sharing about our work with the Aga Khan Rural Support Program in India and dive into some of the key recommendations we are making to our clients.
The Aga Khan Rural Support Program, AKRSPI, is an NGO that empowers rural communities and individuals through professional support, collectivization, and the promotion of individual enterprises to reduce inequality and enhance rural livelihoods. Tribes, Dalits, and marginalized communities comprise more than 80% of their beneficiaries, and women represent more than 65%. We evaluated 3 programs of the nearly 20 programs that the organization is actually running. The first program seeks to strengthen local governance institutions. It's part of AKRSP intervention to enhance rural governance and community institutions. The second program is a rural livelihood promotion program funded by the central government, which aligns with the organization's efforts to enhance financial inclusion, skills, and entrepreneurship. The third program is a solar skill pump irrigation, solar irrigation pump scheme that is part of AKRSP's interventions to improve irrigation and promote renewable energy. For this presentation, we will focus on the policy aspects of our work. Sarah will present the material.
AKRSPI operates within a restrictive and sometimes inconsistent policy and legal space. We have proposed this framework to understand the way AKRSPI engages with policy and legal context and guide our analysis and recommendations. Each of these 4 components inform AKRSPI's intervention, and at the center of this is their vision of enhancing rural livelihoods. The first strategy is capacity building. AKRSPI builds capacity among rural people to engage with their communities and with relevant government schemes. Secondly, they advocate for policy change, directly by developing and proposing models and programs to propose to the government, and indirectly through their capacity building efforts. Thirdly, by forming partnerships with NGOs, government, beneficiaries, and communities, they aim to increase the scope and impact of their work. And finally, monitoring and evaluation provides AKRSPI with the insight that they need to improve its programs, present evidence-based solutions to their partners, and support their advocacy efforts.
We used a similar qualitative method to analyze our projects. It involved desk study and fieldwork. The fieldwork was in India, specifically in the state of Gujarat. In Gujarat, we visited the client's headquarters in Ahmedabad, and also visited some tribal areas in Surat and the Narmada districts. During the fieldwork, we did one-on-one interviews, focus group interviews, and site visits. Some of the people that we interviewed included bureaucrats, elected representatives, beneficiaries, non-beneficiaries, NGOs, scholars, and activists. At this point, we want to get into the needs of our various projects.
I evaluated the program to strengthen local governance institutions in the tribal areas of Gujarat. I'll start by explaining the policy context. Administratively, India is divided into states and either districts and municipalities in the urban areas, or districts, blocks, and villages in the rural areas. The rural bodies are called panchayats. They form a 3-tier structure with district panchayats on top, block panchayats in the middle, and grand panchayats at the bottom. The lower tier bodies, the grand panchayats, are meant to be the cornerstone of rural governance in India. In 1992, a constitutional amendment directed the states to devolve panchayats certain powers and functions so that they could function as true agencies for the development and poverty alleviation of their communities. Also directed the states to provide them with the necessary resources to work as such. Tribal villages were given special treatment to ensure respect to their customary law and their social, religious, and resource management practice, as well as in recognition of the high level of marginalization. In tribal villages, the real cornerstone of rural governance is the Gram Sabha, which is the mere assembly of all the people living in the area covered by the Gram Panchayat. Since the constitutional amendment, the federal government has attempted many efforts to revitalize panchayats and make rural governance work. However, in all but perhaps 1 or 2 states, Panchayats remain dysfunctional and are still lacking the resources and autonomy they need to undertake their role in development and poverty alleviation. The factors behind this are many. The literature highlights the following: a constitutional and legal framework that left too many things to the state's discretion, the political unwillingness of states to let go power, functions, and resources, policy inconsistency and overlapping authority between the states and the Grand Panchayats, and the lack of capacity and relevant skills at the local level, especially in tribal areas. During our field work, we found evidence of a very limited transfer of functions and powers to the Grand Panchayats. Out of the 29 functions that the state could have devolved, only 14 were transferred. And out of these 14, Panchayats are exercising only a small fraction. Sometimes the exercise of these fractions is just a formality. Let me now additionally, the state has found ways, loopholes, to undermine the autonomy of the Grand Panchayats. Just an example. The Gram Sabha is supposed to make the decisions about how to use the federal grants that the government gives to Grand Panchayats. These grants comprise the bulk of Grand Panchayat's budget. However, it's the secretary of the Grand Panchayat who is not an elected official, but a bureaucrat appointed by the state, who sets the agenda of the assembly, and by doing this, determines greatly what decisions are made in the Gram Sabha. There are also limited planning and budgetary skills among the Grand Panchayat members, and lack of incentives since they are not paid. The only elected official, the only official of the Grand Panchayat that is paid is the secretary. He is paid by the state, not by the Grand Panchayat, so he is accountable to the state and not to the village. Finally, we found evidence of a very limited women participation in the field. Let me now describe IQRCPI's program. The program's goal is to enable Gram Sabha and Gram Panchayat to perform the governance role in local planning, delivery of services, and monitoring of public schemes in an effective, transparent, and accountable way. The strategy is to bring citizens, Panchayat, and the state government administration on one platform, Online Switching Agenda, where information about decentralized governance, public services, and access to government schemes is gathered and shared. The underlying assumption is that information will lead to participation, which in turn will lead to good governance. The program has three main components: Panchayat capacity building in the form of knowledge and information dissemination, vision building, planning and budgeting exercises, and financial support. Strengthening of Gram Sabha and Mahila Sabha, which is a women assembly of the female version of the Gram Sabha. Mahila Sabha takes place some days before the Gram Sabha and aims at encouraging participation and empowering women. The last component is the enhancing of government interventions. Now I'm going to present an analysis and recommendations. The program is consistent, we believe, with the context and with AKRSPI's vision, goals, and strategies. The program focuses mostly on building capacity and promoting citizen and women participation. It doesn't aim to tackle some of the most important factors behind rural governance and decentralization, notably the legal and policy framework and the lack of autonomy. This means that even in the case that the program succeeds, its potential to help Grand Panchayats become true units of self-government is limited and long-term. Finally, the program's potential to develop a role model that could serve as a basis to advocate for policy changes is also constrained by the lack of monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. We think that AKRSPI can enhance the impact of their efforts by reinforcing the budgeting and planning skills of their capacity building components. We understand that no single organization can address all factors behind rural governance and decentralization, particularly when top-down decisions are needed. In this case, partnership and advocacy are key. We suggest that AKRSPI partner with other organizations across India to form a coalition that calls for a more detailed description of the national laws, policies, and processes underpinning rural decentralization. At the state level, they can partner with other organizations to, one, develop and advocate for a shared roadmap for an orderly but mandatory transfer of functions, funds, and functionaries to Rampant Chariots. And 2, review the rationale behind the policy to not pay the elected members of the Rampant Chariots. And if no good reason is found, pilot an innovative mechanism to demonstrate the effect of payment on performance and commitment. And if it works, advocate for a policy in this change. Finally, we believe that AKRSPI should reinforce the program with monitoring and evaluation mechanisms, making sure that the data required to conduct outcome-based evaluations in the future is gathered and shared. This concludes my intervention. Now I give the floor to Keskine.
Thank you very much, Pablo. The second policy that we looked at was the National Rural Livelihood Mission, which is also affectionately called the Mission Mandela. With this policy, the client seeks to know areas of the policy that requires policy intervention, so that the client can develop models and frameworks to assist with the implementation of this policy in Gujarat. The policy was promulgated in 2010 with the objective of enhancing the entrepreneurial abilities of the less privileged in rural areas through financial inclusion. The policy seeks to do this through 4 reasons. The first strategy. The foundation of the policy is the formation of self-help groups, here being referred to as SAGs. An SAG is a group of 10 to 15 people. 10 of such SAGs come together to form a village organization. And all SAGs within a village come together to form a village federation. A federation can consist of 2,300 members or 3,000 members. The second strategy is training and skills development. The GLPC provides training through its cluster coordinators. And AKRSP, which is the client, also provides some level of training for SAGs that were directly influenced by India Foundation. The third strategy is financial inclusion. The GLPC plays a facilitation role between SAGs, federations, and banks so that they can get loans. And the fourth strategy is livelihood improvement. The GLPC research into other forms of livelihood within the rural areas so that can also assist SAGs in whatever they do. In the course of our study, these were some of the findings that we made. SAGs have a very well-structured system, which is also democratic for electing their leaders. They have standing committees like Food Produce Committee, paralegals, and elected women representatives. Members of a federation are encouraged to make deposits with the federation and also access loans from the federation. Public awareness of the policy in some rural areas or some villages is very low. Out of about 5 focus group discussions with community leaders or village leaders, it came out that only one leader knew about the policy in his community. Some villages also do not have an SAG, simply because they are oblivious of the existence of the policy. Some SAGs are currently awaiting the threshold of becoming a village organization before they can join a federation. So some of them are currently not members of a federation. I think about 170 was counted in the Sagbara block. The GLPC and AKRSP share common values like social inclusion, poverty alleviation, rural development, employment of the poor, and the creation of community-based organizations. The AKRSP, which is a client, also shares 3 out of the 4 operational strategies of the implementing value, which is GLPC in Gujarat. Mainstream banks find it less costly, more rewarding to give loans to firms that can provide collaterals rather than giving the loans to SAGs. So to these findings, these recommendations are made. And the capacity building, in between the mainstream banks that provide loans at 8% and the informal sector that provides loans from 60 to 100% are the federations. A federation provides loans at 24%, which is 2% per annum. So if federations are strengthened, they can be a viable alternative to the mainstream banks. And to do this, training and skills development is imperative. Some of the SAG leaders and federation leaders recounted that some of their knowledge gaps included organization, leadership, and bookkeeping. The client with its training facilities across the various villages and its training framework can help improve upon the capacity of federations and SAGs. The client can also help with the publicity of the program through a strong network that it has already established across various villages. In terms of advocacy, A non-federated SAG loses out on the economies of scale that comes along with the numbers of a federation. And they also find it difficult getting loans. So the client should advocate that SAGs that are duly registered with the GLPC office should be allowed to join federations, rather than just waiting for the threshold of being a village organization first. Partnership. GLPC should, AKRC should consider building a working partnership with the GLPC to pursue their shared interests. They should also consider moving from a guarantor-guarantee sort of relations to a co-designer of models. In policy, we believe that what gets evaluated gets done. Therefore, the client should also consider building frameworks to evaluate their engagement with the policy over time. At this point, Sarah will tell us more about the solar irrigation plants.
Thank you, Keskine. The third program area, AKRSPI's Solar Irrigation Pump Scheme, is a donor-funded program that aims to bring rain-fed lands under irrigation and displace diesel-powered pumps through the installation of solar photovoltaic pump systems. Currently, under irrigation and diesel fuel costs restrict many farmers' productivity and resilience. This program aims to increase productivity, capacity, and quality of life in a way that is environmentally and economically sustainable, as well as scalable. Historically, expanding irrigation through infrastructure development and highly subsidized electricity has played a major role in enhancing agricultural livelihoods. However, at the same time, these electricity subsidies have enabled groundwater to be pumped at a negligible cost, which has contributed to critically depleted groundwater resources in many areas across India. Solar irrigation pumps play into this energy, groundwater, agriculture nexus because although they provide electricity in order to extend irrigation services or transition to renewable energy sources, the perception of free solar energy distorts the incentives for conserving water. The Gujarati government understands this nexus. While they've been working to extend rural electrification and promote renewable energy through the National Solar Mission, as well as their own solar irrigation pump scheme, they've also been working to reform their electricity subsidy regime. While AKRSPI targets small, marginal farmers who should have access to irrigation, in order to protect their future livelihoods, sustainable water management is an important part of any model. Government policies surrounding solar irrigation pumps and electricity will influence the scalability and impact of AKRSPI's work in this space in the future and will shape it in the coming years. However, an important first step was to assess the impact of AKRSPI's current solar irrigation pump scheme. I should note that many of the solar systems I looked at were installed less than a year ago, so a fuller evaluation will be required after multiple cropping seasons, but I was still able to make some valuable observations. I spoke with groups of farmers from 5 different villages, and while each group gave unique responses regarding the key indicators that I developed for the program objectives, today I will speak to the general trends. Green indicates good performance, orange indicates partially effective performance, and gray indicates an underdeveloped objective. Firstly, farmers reported improved productivity ratios due to the low pumping costs and increased convenience provided to them through solar irrigation systems. But there was a lack of informed planning and group-level organization around how to best use the generated electricity. There was also no complementary program to enhance water management practices in the face of low pumping costs. And because CSR donor funding provides 97% of the capital costs and only requires farmers to make a marginal contribution, the sustainability and scalability of the program is also in question. So, AKRSPI can enhance their impact going forward by taking steps in these 4 key areas. Here are a few key recommendations. AKRSPI can build capacity among farmers to plan for sustainable development by bolstering their leadership training, helping groups develop and strengthen their group-level institutional systems, and promoting skills and knowledge associated with solar technology, sustainable water management, as well as relevant government schemes. In relation to partnership, AKRSPI can align this program with water management conservation programs to promote sustainable groundwater use. It can also increase the scalability of this program by moving beyond donor-based funding and leveraging the existing government scheme for solar irrigation pumps. And this can feed into an improved financial model, wherein government and banking institutions such as the National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development provide specialized loan and repayment programs for farmers who want to access schemes like this. Finally, as AKRSPI contemplates shifting to a grid-connected model wherein groups of farmers form cooperatives to sell back excess electricity to the state, it should partner with the International Water Management Institute, who has experience piloting this model and experience negotiating the necessary power purchasing agreement. In pursuing this next phase, AKRSPI will need to advocate for a competitive feed-in tariff, or price, for this excess electricity. If the tariff is not high enough, farmers will seek another productive source for their electricity, which may involve the overuse of groundwater resources. And finally, through regular monitoring and evaluation of key variables, AKRSPI can improve this model and demonstrate the necessary rationale for key stakeholders to get involved. So, in conclusion of all of our studies, AKRSPI's work in improving local governance, engaging the National Rural Livelihood Mission, and promoting solar irrigation contributes to its vision of enhancing rural livelihoods. Our framework analysis also illuminates areas in which AKRSPI can strengthen its approach. By doing this, AKRSPI can continue to engage communities, change the policy environment, increase its impact, and improve its activities. Finally, we would like to say thank you for AKRSPI for allowing us to learn about the important work that they do and for their support, and to those staff, faculty, and colleagues who contributed to our GP² experience. And thank you to everyone here today for taking the time to listen, and for those who are able to tune in online. We'd now like to invite your comments and your questions regarding what we've shared with you today.
So I'm curious about the advocacy part of these organizations, in the sense of who does it? Do they have a particular position in their organization who plays that role? And how do they do it? Were you able to observe a kind of different behavior in the advocacy realm than in other realms that you looked at?
Well, they have a model to advocate for changes in policy. It consists of developing programs, monitor them, evaluate them, and then prove that they work, and go to the government and show them what can be done. If the policy is tweaked in this respect, or enhancing this other aspect, or if this barrier is removed, for example. So they are piloting models. They are proving that they work, and they are proposing them to the government when they work. That's the basic model they use.
Do they ever, like if you think about advocacy and activism, do they lead into more activism? Like how open and powerful is their advocacy?
Well, that's a really interesting and good question, because what we found is that AKRSPI has in the past collaborated on different schemes and programs with the government, so that relationship is really important. And that's potentially one reason why they engage in trying to affect policy change in this specific manner. Whereas in, maybe activism doesn't have to be adversarial, but often that's the form it can take, and that would probably not be the most conducive to change in this.
Right, so that's a strategic decision that they've taken around how they work.
Mm-hmm.
They are definitely very constrained when it comes to adversarial positions. Yes.
And also considering the political context, being an activist wouldn't be a reasonable thing to do. It's better you advocate through evidence-based programs or models that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is really interesting. I have two questions, and the first one follows on directly from Maura's question, which is that particularly in the program focused on local governance, I was wondering how you encountered political actors or political party affiliations. I didn't hear you mention these categories at all. And so I'm just wondering how the organization conceptualizes the relationship between politics and policy change, and how you do as well. Because certainly in terms of governance at the local level in India, there are strong engagements and investments by different parties, right, in which people may or may not have affiliations with. So I'm just wondering how that shaped the research space that you were in, as well as your recommendations. And then the second question was, you mentioned that you were working in tribal areas in Gujarat, but I was wondering how those identity categories did or did not affect your results in any of these projects. So both tribal as well as Dalit and other marginalized communities, how would you disaggregate the rural livelihood by those kinds of different categories, if at all?
Yeah, I will take the first question. When centralization was directed by the central government, the decision to centralize was taken. The states were a lot less powerful than they are now. And they were able to stop the process at that level, or maybe at the district level, and to create a parallel structure, which is political, to make sure that Gram Panchayats continue. I say continue because that's the way they have been functioning in the past, working as implementing agencies for federal schemes. I would say that the nexus between policy and politics is critical, but you really don't see it on the field because of this parallel structure, which is the one that is actually running things at the village level, at the block level. So I think that at this point, there's politics within there's politics, of course, even at the village level, but it's not influencing the policy because the policy is made at state level and it goes through this parallel structure, bureaucratic structure. There's a quote that I like very much. It says that at the state and city level, decentralization brought India democracy. At the village level, it brought bureaucracy. I don't know if that.
To your second question, I think where my section of the research focused was on tribal communities. So it will be wrong if I generalize it to cover the whole of rural India, because rural India is complex. It's not only made up of tribal people. And the client seeks to work with tribal people in this context. So the recommendations are strictly for those tribal communities where the client wants to work with, and not for the entire rural India, because that is super complex.
And just to add to that, I think in terms of disaggregating the different groups of people that we were speaking with, one of the components or elements that we did find, and we touched on a little bit, was the gender component to the different programs, and so that was probably one of the strongest themes that came out across the programs.
Well, I wanted to thank you for, I thought, quite an astute presentation. I, like many people here, have had the opportunity to also partner with and visit the Rural Support Program in India, although in the Dams district, so slightly south of where we were, much more indigenous peoples than otherwise. And I particularly was impressed that you managed to pull out a number of key elements, partnership, advocacy, and monitoring and evaluation. And I would have, I'm sure we could have a more involved conversation about advocacy, given that there's a national council of the Rural Support Program that frankly takes a very strong view about advocacy, given what it feels is the somewhat unique position of the Aga Khan in India. Leaving that aside, what I wanted to touch on was what I thought well brought out on monitoring and evaluation. This is a program that does everything everywhere, and the imprints of the Gujarat state are all over this program. And it's difficult to imagine that this program would really be replicable in any other setting, given that it's all things to all people in all places, with the state's footprints all over it. I'd be interested in, your reactions to that. Do you think they should be doing less, and perhaps in a sense doing more by doing less? And if so, what should they be thinking about?
Okay, let me take it. With the policy, mostly in the context of what we're trying to do with poverty, we try to touch on many things. But I think at the moment, the client should focus on what they think they can do best. In this sense, when you look at the National Rural Livelihood Mission, the client is focusing on how to help self-help groups, how to help women. So that is a focus that the client is trying to look at. Not trying to touch on all the other aspects of poverty, but looking at poverty among women. So the client has created a niche for itself and looking at that section of the policy. However, if a policy tries to touch on so many things, you end up finding it so difficult even evaluating the policy. The budget that could have helped effectively implement one policy may be shared across several policies and end up losing the effect. So if I'm to give an objective feedback to the government or to the client, I'll advise that they look at where they do a comparative analysis and look at where it best serves the purpose and invest as much as possible. That way they'll be able to evaluate it, they'll be able to see the benefits of what they are investing over time, and that will be much more productive, I think.
How did your clients respond to the advice or recommendations that you presented?
Well, we still actually have yet to submit our final report to the client, so we've been working with them to receive feedback and that type of thing, but the final recommendations are actually the framework and the analytical framework that you saw. It's been continuing to evolve, but really in its current form, it's come out quite recently as we've been able to really gain a better understanding of, like you mentioned, what Keskine very diverse areas of intervention look like when they come together and how they all feed into its vision. So that's something that we'll be, we can keep you tuned on if you're interested in. Yeah. Thank you. Joanna.
I have a question just about the second part. Just like a general overview, you mentioned something about the self-help groups enabling them to have an alternative financial like financial capability or capacity by creating some kind of like credit union? I'm just curious how would that look? What is a bank alternative in this regard?
Currently, the federations. A federation is an amalgamation of several self-help groups. And a federation has a membership of like 2,300 to like 3,000. And members are encouraged to make deposits with the federation. That is what they do. So that if a member wants a loan, the member can apply for the loan through his or her SAG. And they provide the loans at 24% per annum, that is 2% per month, as opposed to the loan from the informal sector, which is like 60 to 100%. And the mainstream banks, that provides it at 8%. So in between the two, there is a federation. So if the federation is strengthened to mobilize more from its people, then these people can also have more access to loans without looking at the informal sector. So it becomes an alternative to 8% from the mainstream banks, which is not coming forward anyway.
Let us take questions from the clients. They have typed in? They have it, okay.
What's the type of
I thought it was a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to ask you, one of the most interesting themes to me was capacity building. What does it mean in that context?
Well, I guess,
Beyond the obvious. In that context.
yeah, speaking also to your previous question. Capacity, I believe, will always be constrained by the fact that autonomy has not been given to this people. We know that human capital evaluates or depreciates very easily if you use it, right? And they are not putting to use the capacity that they are gaining. And that's what I guess maybe I would add to what Keskine said in regards to the question and complement the previous one by Professor Topper. I think that Keskine could do more, indeed, by doing less if they try to find a way to, given the constraints they have, political constraints, by the fact that they were created, and also by the fact that it's a Muslim organization working in a very complex environment, politically complex environment. They should, I guess, try to find a way to advocate for more meaningful devolution of authority and functions to people, so that capacity is actually put to use and fulfills its purpose.
And to add to that, in my context, I believe capacity building is making sure the SAGs and federations are better positioned to work effectively. And the client has been doing some of these training with their other models. They have training facilities and training framework across various villages. So the focus was to identify some of the knowledge gaps of the SAGs and the federations. And that was going to inform the sort of capacity building that the client was to perceive. And I think that is how it was approached in that.